For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Roithmeyer. I have the privilege and the honor of serving as the CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. Want to welcome you to the last in our scientific series in Palm Beach from the ADDF. I say this as I look at Heidi and Tom McWilliams, who started this series 2 years ago. And I can't believe we're already at our last this year, right? Which is good. So to Heidi and Tom, a big thank you for bringing this series here to Palm Beach. We also have with us tonight, Heidi was a co-chair of a very successful Palm Beach dinner we had just a few weeks ago. Chaired it along with Nancy Goods, who's in the back, and a longtime board member of ours, and Tom's a board member of ours also. So Nancy, always great to be in Palm Beach with you. And for all the folks who are members of the board of the ADDF, can you just raise your hand? Because I see Sharon, and I see Larry, and I see my good friend over here, and back yonder. We just have a wonderful, wonderful board at the ADDF. So nice to be with our board members. Tonight, you were in for a treat, and I think, Heidi, we were talking about this. I think we saved the best for last this year to do a wonderful treat. And to provide some context on that treat, ADDF, of those of you who were at the event a couple of weeks ago, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. The organization founded by Leonard and Ronald Lauder, along with their co-founder, our co-founder and Chief Science Officer, Dr. Howard Fillett. And when the ADDF was founded 25 years ago, it would be about a couple of things. One, science and translational science only, and you'll hear about that tonight. Two, we would not give out grants, we would make investments. So investments into academics, investments into biotech. And if there was ever any return on those ideas, that money would come back to ADDF and we put it right back into the science. We're known as a venture philanthropy. And that we would focus on only three things: diagnostics, preventions, and new therapies for Alzheimer's. And we have a couple of claims to fame. One, there is a PET scan that came into existence about 15 years ago that can accurately diagnose if a person has Alzheimer's. 2 years ago, there was a blood test that we funded that now can predict Alzheimer's. And a bunch of us were just in Europe for the last couple of weeks at a variety of scientific meetings. Let me tell you about the other diagnostics and predictives that are coming. Eye scans, where you'll go for your annual eye exam and they'll be able to tell, are you at risk to Alzheimer's? Digital initiatives, everything from digital watches that you wear to artificial intelligence that can be predictive. And these are looking at things before you ever have symptoms. And you know, even 3 years ago, I would have said just what I said now, can predict it even before you have symptoms. And people would say, I can know, but why would I want to know? Well, you want to know because, one, there are treatments that are coming to market. You'll hear about that. But this is where this night gets really, really special, because there is a guarantee. We know you can now prevent the onset of Alzheimer's, and there are things you can do to push out cognitive issues, and you're going to hear about that explicitly tonight. Science tells us we can delay up to 40%, but I'm going to leave that to the scientists you'll hear from tonight. I will tell you, it's just very, very, very special with us, and she's going to get a proper introduction. But to my left, to my far left, Dr. Miia Kivipelto. She is the leading prevention scientist of Alzheimer's in the world, and she comes to us from Sweden, but you're going to hear a lot more about her. Yeah, there we go. And you're going to hear a lot more about her and from her. I know many are used to having Dr. Fillett be here tonight, but he is not, but his number two at the ADDF, Dr. Laura Nisenbaum, is here. She's our Executive Director of Drug Development. She's had a career in industry, 20 years at Eli Lilly, 5 years at Biogen prior to coming to the ADDF. But it is particularly important and unique and fun that Laura is here with Miia, because just 2 weeks ago, Laura spent the better part of a week in Sweden with Dr. Miia Kivipelto, touring her labs where the top prevention work in the world is being done on Alzheimer's. So with that, Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for the very warm welcome. It's wonderful to be here This is the first time I'm in Palm Beach, and I must say it is fabulous. And it is wonderful to see all of your faces here with us this afternoon. So thank you very much for coming. And I am truly excited to be able to be here to tell you a little bit about the ADDF and where we think the field is going, and to then speak with Dr. Miia Kivipelto. As Mark said, I have been in this business for over 25 years, first at Eli Lilly and then at Biogen, and I've been focusing on neuroscience drug discovery and development for all of those years. And I have to say, where we sit today, this is truly a pivotal moment as we are looking at the first new drugs that are coming onto market that have the potential for disease modification, so not just treatment of symptoms, but also helping to delay the progression of Alzheimer's disease. But these are only the very first step in a very complicated puzzle that we are beginning to solve. And as we look at where we are going, we know that we need to focus on not just removing amyloid, not just removing tau from the brain, but looking at how we can approach this complicated puzzle by focusing on what we call the biology of aging. So we know that aging is the leading risk factor for the development of Alzheimer's disease. And with that, we also are beginning to understand that there are many underlying factors that contribute to these complex diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease. These include neuroinflammation, metabolic disorders, and many other novel targets. And ADDF is helping these innovative ideas shepherd through from our funded investigators to be able to bring drugs into the pipeline so that we can begin to understand how they can be effective. But sitting next to me, as Mark has mentioned, is one of the really, truly innovative scientists in our field. She is the founder of the Fingers Brain Health Institute and a professor of clinical geriatrics at the Karolinska Institute for Alzheimer's Research. She is also a senior geriatrician and director for research and development of the theme aging at the Karolinska University Hospital. And she is a really prized member of the ADDF Board of Governors. She is especially celebrated for her landmark finger study, which has shown that multimodal lifestyle interventions, such as diet and exercise, can actually prevent cognitive decline. So as Mark said, there is reason to understand the diagnosis for Alzheimer's disease. And as Mark mentioned, I have actually now really been very fortunate to know Miia for almost the entire time that I've been at ADDF, which is not that long. But that being said, we had the opportunity to meet a year ago at the ADPD conference, and that was in Barcelona. And we hatched the idea together that we could begin to understand the biological mechanism that is leading to this prevention of decline that was observed in the finger study. So at ADDF, we are working to analyze the blood samples from the participants of these finger studies, and I'll let Miia tell you more about that. But building on that, we then had a chance to spend 2 very amazing days in her memory clinic and visiting with her laboratory. And we were so impressed by the incredible teamwork, collaboration, and science that is happening within her facilities. I will probably steal the thunder a bit by saying that we had a chance to watch patients watch the process that the patients go through to understand their diagnosis, not just in a year or 6 months or 3 months. They are able to do this in 5 days, which is truly changing the way Alzheimer's research and diagnosis is being done. And so it is with that background that I now turn this over to Dr. Miia Kivipelto to tell us more about her work. And I guess what I would start out with is, Miia, can you tell us a little bit more about the finger study, what this is, and what the research has shown?
So thank you so much for the very kind introduction, and so happy to be back. I was here 1 year ago, a little bit more than that, and thinking back, first it's wonderful to be back, but also in the science, so much has happened already during 1 year, both what it comes to prevention, early detection and treatment. And not only science, but we also can start using this knowledge in clinical practice. So I'm happy to give some updates from the finger trial, as you said, Laura. That was the first randomized control trial to really show that lifestyle changes can prevent cognitive decline. If I go a bit back in the history, I have been now in research more than 25 years, and I have always had the interest, can we prevent or at least postpone the onset of Alzheimer's disease? When I started my research, it was only high age and the genetic factors, basically nothing what we could do. So I started to work as a young physician, starting to study different risk factors. We found first high blood pressure at midlife, high cholesterol, then it was diabetes, smoking, depression, all these kind of risk factors. And already at midlife, so we know that the process leading to Alzheimer's disease can start around 20 years before we can have the diagnosis. And that's why I normally say it's never too early to start to prevent dementia. Now, the list of modifiable risk factors has been getting longer and longer. We do not anymore have only the vascular lifestyle factors, but we have factors like hearing loss, that is very common, social isolation, loneliness, stress, and sleep disturbances, which are, I would say, very common in our societies. And altogether, it has been estimated that at least 40% of all dementias are linked to modifiable risk factors and could be prevented. For me, 40% is a huge number, so there is a clear prevention potential. And if we could just postpone the onset of dementia with 5 years, there would be 50% less patients. So I would say that the impact is there not only for the patients and caregivers, but also for the whole society. So this was the starting point for my research. Prevention should be the key element if we want to manage the global dementia epidemic. It has been more difficult to translate these positive epidemiological findings to successful clinical trials. And clinical trials are so important because that's the highest level of evidence. And I'm so happy that ADDF is putting so much efforts on funding high-level, high-quality randomized trials. So what we did in the finger trial, we thought that given that there are so many risk factors, maybe it's not enough if we only have one vitamin or only physical activity, but you need to put together all these different risk factors. And that's where the finger model comes. So we use the finger model. It's like 1 hand and 5 fingers, easy to remember. We have physical activity. Healthy diet is the Mediterranean or healthy Nordic diet. Cognitive stimulation is good to keep brain active. Social activities and even the relaxation. I mentioned the stress and sleep disturbances, so the relaxation is part of the 4th finger. And then taking care of all vascular risk factors. What is good for the heart is good for the brain. That's what we did in the finger trial for 2 years. And the results were quite significant. It was not only cognition. We could improve the memory. We could improve the psychomotoric speed, how quickly we can do things, the processing speed, our planning skills. But on top of that, there was reduced risk for stroke, reduced risk for other chronic diseases. Quality of life was better, and we could even have a health economic savings. So that has been the story of the finger, and now I'm very happy that we are ready with the 11-year follow-up, and we can start analyzing the blood-based biomarkers so that we can learn more what are the underlying mechanisms.
That is really inspirational and truly game-changing. And we've learned so much from that original finger study. What I think I look at in the future is really twofold as you have broadened out your findings. So on the one hand, can you tell us about the work that you're doing to translate the findings that you have generated from fingers within the original population, which is more in the Nordic states, to investigating what's going on across the world using the worldwide fingers approach?
Yes, so we published the first finger results in The Lancet. It's a high-quality journal, 2015. And it was a lot of interest from different research groups. They also wanted to test the multi-domain finger model. So we launched the Worldwide Fingers Network 2017. And now we are having 49 countries from all continents who are part of the Worldwide Fingers, including many low and middle income countries. And I think in these countries, the impact can be even greater because there are so many risk factors. So that has been really, really nice. And what we are doing is a master protocol. We try to harmonize all the trials. And that's quite rare, I would say, in the randomized trials. They are normally conducted in isolation. So what we want to do is really to share our learnings and share data. So data sharing is the final goal, and you can think how much big data we can get from the Worldwide Fingers. We now have already 10,000 participants, and that will give us totally new ways and opportunities to analyze the data. I'm thinking gene-environmental interactions, data-driven, AI-driven analysis. So that's where we are now. It has been really wonderful teamwork.
That is truly amazing. When I think about the world that I came from, which was in big pharma, we start with the small clinical trials, but in small, we're talking about less than 100. You are going from your finger study with roughly 1,200, is that right, to more than 10,000 participants across the world. And I think that this is something that others can really look to you to model as they're thinking about how to advance the field. So one of the things that we know that we are faced with is that Alzheimer's disease is a very complicated disease. It's not a single entity. As we are looking at where we stand now, we feel that we're more at the point similar to a disease such as cancer, where we need to look at how can we incorporate combination therapies and precision medicine. And so can you tell us a little bit about the next generation of the finger model as you're thinking about how you utilize a combination therapy approach?
Yes, that's a great question. And we are now upgrading the finger to finger 2.0. So we are conducting the next generation of clinical trials, and that means precision prevention. You have maybe heard about precision medicine. That's used a lot in the cancer field, and that is, I think, the direction where we need to move in the Alzheimer field. And I would not only like to use the word precision medicine, but I said precision prevention. We want to start early, and I think that is very important because it's easier to prevent the brain disorders than try to repair that. So early treatment is really the key. And what we want to do now in the Finger 2.0 is the combination therapies. We have just started the first combination therapy called MedFinger, where we combine for the first time finger intervention with the diabetes medicine metformin. And I'm very grateful for the support from ADDF for that trial. So it's the first trial really having the real combination. So for me, it's not lifestyle or drugs. It's the combination when needed, giving the right treatment for the right persons at the right time. You may think why we selected metformin, the diabetes medication. Well, we know that diabetes and Alzheimer, there are many links. Some researchers have even said that Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes because there are so many common links. And metformin is quite an interesting drug. It has been used for many, many years for diabetes treatment, but it has never been tested for dementia prevention for persons who don't yet have diabetes. And it has very interesting mechanisms. Inflammation that we believe is very early in Alzheimer's disease, oxidative stress, it increases the insulin sensitivity. It can increase the blood flow and glucose metabolism in the brain. Of course, amyloid and tau as well, the vascular system, even more anti-aging. So it has very many different targets, and that's why, for me, it's a very interesting combination with the finger thing. So it's 600 participants, and the trial is now ongoing. Very exciting.
So this is a model where you are taking interventions, lifestyle interventions that you know can be helpful, and then testing whether a drug that can be add on and start to put together those pieces in the puzzle. But we know that there are so many underlying factors that contribute to Alzheimer's disease. So is there a way that you can use this model and look to test these other types of mechanisms in more of a platform approach?
Yes, I would love to use more the platform design for clinical trials. It takes very long time to conduct clinical trials. If we are thinking phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, it may take 10 years. It's long time. With the platform design, like we now use in the MedFinger, or we have been establishing, developing that platform, we could add additional interventions. So we could add an arm, for example, with the new diabetes medication. GLP-1 is one of the new medications tested, or maybe one of the new amyloid treatments like the lecanemab. So we could use the same control arm and compare the different treatments against the one control arm much quicker, and you could easier have the go, no-go decision. This has been again used in the cancer field, but not yet in the Alzheimer field. And I think ADDF, we together, could be also leading that kind of design. Can we conduct the trials in a more effective way? Can we speed up the process? So I think that's also, for me, the next generation of clinical trials.
And Miia, you brought up the idea of doing this together with ADDF. I can say that as a result of our discussions that we had in Sweden, we are in fact working with you to see what could that new model be. So as a result of the pandemic, we know that we can be very effective in working across boundaries, across time zones. And we are looking to see what could that new model be where we have an active partnership, not just focused on the development of drugs and not just focused on the development of biomarkers, but is there a way to put a bigger picture together by working across the ocean and across organizations in a much more global, as you say, precision prevention approach. So we are very, very excited about it. But that brings me to a question for you. So as you look at how we bring this research into clinical practice, I think one of the lessons that we've learned is that it takes a very long time to bring these new ideas and implement them into practice. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see your approach to then influence the implementation of these new ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question because it takes normally at least 15 years to start to implement the research findings. 15 years is too long time. And especially for lifestyle interventions, we have no time to wait. So I think we could do and we should do it much quicker. So what we are doing now, we are working with finger implementation. We have this memory clinic where we can do the diagnosis within 5 days. We are really happy for that and the patients as well. But I got feedback from my patients, it's not enough. We need to have more support for the lifestyle changes. And actually only a small part of the patients who come to us, they have amyloid and tau. They have other reasons for the cognitive problems. So they need to have more support. So what we did was we opened a brain health clinic in connection to the memory clinic, where the patient can go there after the diagnosis, meet physiotherapist, dietitian, get support and get reminders. So that has been a great model. Now we aim to have the same on primary care level, and we are also working with the concept family fingers, because we know it's not only the patient, but the caregivers who also need the support. And we know that caregivers have also a higher risk for cognitive impairment because of various reasons. So it could be both for the patients and for the family caregiver. And finally, what we are working with, as I said, it's never too early to start to prevent dementia. Why not start even earlier at school, for example? So we have now a concept, High Five for Life, that we are conducting in some schools, and it has been very successful. So I think there are many models, and we could use the finger concept in many ways.
So I want to share with everybody that in addition to having the wonderful opportunity to meet with Miia in her clinic and her lab, I also had an opportunity to bring some family along with me. And I had my daughter, who is in her 20s and starting out in her career. And I can say that all of these concepts really resonated for her as she's starting to think about looking at her parents, looking at her grandparents, and then how can she help influence the next generation. So I think this is an area that I'm particularly excited about.
And what we also discussed, Laura, was this possibility of developing finger app using the new technology that could help a person with the lifestyle changes, that you could have more individualized feedback based on your risk factors and getting some reminders, some positive feedback. So that's something what we are working with. There are many apps out there, but not so many of those are science-based. And again, if we want to implement, I think it's very important, especially for the lifestyle interventions, that we have a randomized trials and it's a science-based.
I was particularly struck by some of the ideas that your team had around the development of this app. Can you share with us some of these examples?
Well, we have been trying different kind of new technology. We have a small robot, which we have been giving to our patients, and he or she is giving some reminders what to do. We have glasses, and the glasses can talk. They can give us small reminders. Please call to your friend, go out and take a walk, and different kind of things. So we are now trying to see what are the best solutions what we can use. I have this kind of ring who is monitoring my sleep and giving feedback, very nice feedback, not very bad feedback. So having positive feedback and reminders. So I think we have a pieces already there what we could use when we are having that app. So very exciting area indeed.
So I want to come back to something that Mark introduced the concept that ADDF has been really at the forefront in helping to develop diagnostic tools for Alzheimer's disease. And I think that, it was not that long ago when the only time that one received a diagnosis, a definitive diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, was actually at autopsy. It was necessary to be able to look to find those amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles in the brain post-mortem. Now, we've changed how we approach that diagnosis. So the first PET scan, the imaging agent that can now be used to be able to detect the amyloid plaques in the brain. There are CSF tests that can do the same. And as Mark mentioned, we helped the first blood test make it to market. And that has really been a game changer for the field, because some of our first clinical trials, you've heard about the dozens of drugs through the past 20 years that have failed in clinical trials. And part of the reason they failed was that they were studying a drug mechanism in patients who did not have that problem in their brain. So we were developing anti-amyloid therapies, but we were treating patients who did not have amyloid in the brain. And so we need to be able to develop biomarkers and diagnostic tests that can help identify the patients, first for the clinical trials, and then for the treatment of these patients. Can you tell us a little bit about how you are using some of these novel diagnostic tools in your diagnostic pathway with your patients?
Oh yeah, and this has been, I would say, a great evolution how we are diagnosing Alzheimer's disease. So in our clinic, big part of the patients who come to us, they don't have Alzheimer, they have subjective cognitive impairment, around 50%. So people come quite early to us, which is good. 30% have mild cognitive impairment, and maybe 20% have Alzheimer's disease. So when patients are coming to us, we always have the brain scan. We normally use 3 Tesla. You can see many things. You can really see the atrophy. You can see the hippocampus area. You can see if there are white matter lesions. And Laura, you could see the new MRI, 7 Tesla. You can see maybe too much. It's like a lot of things what you can see in the brain. But that just shows that the technology is moving on. We are not yet using that, of course, in the clinic, but we have wonderful tools to visualize what is going on in the brain. And I think that will help us in the personalized medicine. I think Alzheimer's disease may not be one disease. Maybe there are 4 or 5 or maybe more subtypes of Alzheimer's disease. If we are thinking breast cancer today, there are these subtypes, and you tailor and you match set the subtype with the treatment. And that's my hope and my dream for the Alzheimer in the future. And here the biomarkers, I think, will have a really central position. So MRI is one what we are using, but we are also using the CSF-based biomarkers. So we can measure tau, we can measure beta amyloid, and the blood-based biomarkers, which are already there and will come more and more, will of course make that much easier. And it's always the combination. We have the clinical test, we have the blood-based biomarkers or CSF and MRI. Could we use more digital biomarkers? That's something for the future. Some researchers are saying that digital is the new blood, that we kind of have so much information from the digital biomarkers that could be used in the future. So we are now testing an eye tracker where the patient is looking and reading the test, and from the eye movements, we can see what is going on. That's quite nice because the patients do not feel so stressful. They just do the test and we can monitor that. So I believe that there may be new ways to support in the diagnosis as well. So that's one area we are working with.
And we partner very well with Miia in that front. So the ADDF has a $100 million fund with partners from Gates Venture, Jeff Bezos, and some of the pharma companies, Lilly, Biogen, and some of our other partners, where we are investing on developing and commercializing diagnostic tests. So you're talking about eye scans, as you mentioned, more blood tests, digital tests. And one of the things that I got very excited about as I was visiting your clinic is the potential to start bringing in these novel diagnostic tools and testing them out in your clinic so that we can understand how they could be helpful. Now, with these diagnostic tools, we continue to hear the question, but why would I want to know that I have Alzheimer's disease? Can you give us your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think there are many good reasons. First, if you have symptoms, it's good to know why that symptom is there. And it's not only Alzheimer, there are many other reasons that can be behind the memory problem. So that's one important reason. It can be hearing loss, it can be some vitamin deficiency, it can be some medication that is not good. So it's also checking what are the reasons for memory problems and for the brain health. Brain is very sensitive for many things. So I normally talk not only about Alzheimer, but checking all the risk factors for the brain health. Early detection is important, I would say, for all kind of interventions. If we are talking about non-pharmacological or pharmacological, starting earlier, I believe, and we know, are having better efficacy. So, for example, APOE4, that's the main risk factor, risk gene for Alzheimer's disease. We know now that the finger intervention is having even more efficacy if you have APOE4. You can't change your genes, but if you have the risk gene, at least we have something to offer. And I think some of the new treatments as well, we may know that some of them are working better, some may have more side effects, so it's important to know the genotype for these type of things as well. So knowing that, I think, has many good reasons now and even more so in the future. So we talk a lot about timely diagnosis. That's maybe the even better term, that timely diagnosis when you are ready. We don't recommend any screening for all people, but if you have family history, if you have concerns, so then knowing what are the risk factors and profiles is important.
One of the other things that really struck me from your findings is thinking about, as you say, identifying the right type of treatment for patients. So you've had an opportunity to profile the patients that come through your clinic. And I was really astounded by some of your findings around what % of these patients might actually be eligible for the anti-amyloid therapies versus what other types of factors we may need to be looking at.
That's a very good question, because now when we have the FDA approval for one of the amyloid drugs, lecanemab and even aducanumab, there have been a lot of discussions, who are the patients, who are the persons who should receive that. So what we did in our memory clinic, we checked how big part of our patients would have amyloid or tau and that type of profile. And we were quite surprised to see that it was only 28% of our patients who would be eligible for these type of treatments. So we can find these patients, yes, but it's not all. So clearly, there are so many other mechanisms. We need to continue the research for other type of treatments. And I'm especially thinking the biology of aging. And I'm so happy that ADDF is really reshaping the field, putting more efforts on that. So there are many mechanisms and many targets. Repurposed drugs like metformin, what we are using, these are easy to use and could be one opportunity. And I think now almost 1/3, 30% of the drugs in the pipeline are using repurposed drugs. So there has been a change. The field has been changing. It has been taking some time, but it has been changing. And again, ADDF, you have been doing wonderful work here.
it really has been an evolution. When we look back 5 or so years ago, we were seeing that more than 70% of the drugs in development were focused on anti-amyloid and anti-tau treatments. And now, as we look at the over 120 drugs in the pipeline for Alzheimer's disease, greater than 75% of these drugs are focused on targets beyond removing amyloid and tau from the brain. So as I said, we truly are at a pivotal moment, and we are seeing that there is a true impact as we shape the field to focus more on the biology of aging.
Fully agree. And if I'm thinking the effect size, for example, lecanemab, it can reduce the cognitive decline around 27%. That's something, but clearly not enough. So if we could add treatments for tau, for inflammation, for vascular system, maybe then we can really come to the bigger number. So for me, the combination lifestyle and different type of drugs. And again, if we think cancer treatment or diabetes treatment, combination therapy has been really the key when you can do it. So I'm very optimistic for the future where we are now, given where we are with the prevention, with the early detection and the first treatments. It has been very positive to have this good news, but it's not enough. We need more.
So let me ask you to put your prognosticator hat on. Where do you see us in 5 years or 10 years from now in the prevention, treatment, and cure for Alzheimer's disease?
I hope already after 5 years, we see Alzheimer's disease as a disease that can be prevented and treated. So we have been changing the attitude that is like other diseases. And I think we can do that. I mentioned the prevention potential. Maybe 40, maybe 50% can be prevented. That would be a huge impact. If we can, on top of that, have the new treatments, so I think we can start being there that you can start treating Alzheimer early enough and you can manage the condition. So it is the personalized, it's the precision prevention, it's the combination therapy, it's the next generation of clinical trials, and importantly, is the collaboration. I think Alzheimer's disease is so huge challenge that no one can handle it alone. So being open with the data, sharing data, and having the new ideas how we can develop the field, then we can make it even quicker, maybe 2 years.
I love the optimism.
Lovely. First of all, can we have a round of applause for the two of them? We're going to open this up to questions for everybody, but a couple of plugs before we do that. Number one, you all have on your chairs Brain Health, authored by the Dr. Miia Kivipelto. This was something that, well, why don't you talk about how the book came about, and then I'll give the plug here in the United States.
That was here in Palm Beach last year. So we wrote this book first in Swedish because there were so many questions. People wanted to know exactly how to do, what to do. So we did that. The Queen of Sweden, Silvia, is here as well. Her mother had Alzheimer's disease, so she's a big supporter of Alzheimer's disease. Then I visited here. And Mark, do you want to tell the rest of the story?
The rest of the story is, I think, with McWilliams and a few others of us, is like, why don't we have this book in English here in the United States? So the ADDF has produced it in cooperation with me in English. You all have a copy for tonight. You can get autographed copies if you want. But I will say, and this is just a fun anecdote story, obviously I'm the CEO of ADDF, so I have access to any number of these books. And when we have guests in the house, and we have a house out on the east end of Long Island, we have a house in Westchester County, we always put the books in the guest rooms. And they always leave with the guests. And it's just the most amazing thing. And it happens to be people of a certain age, and you can see it's very user-friendly to read. And it's amazing when we talk to our friends, they talk to us about the 5 fingers. So, which is just absolutely great. So that's part of what's here. Also, another anecdote, and then I'm going to ask each of you a question, then we're opening it up to everybody. Happened to be along for part of this trip that Laura is talking about. And at Mia's university, where she has these programs that are going on, they're always attracting folks to clinical trials. And we heard this story of a patient who came in who thought they were having some cognitive issues and then went through the tests and was told, no, everything's fine. You actually don't qualify for these, to be in these studies. Said, no, you gotta let me in. I've read the book, I believe all this, I want access to everything. And it's also interesting to see this in Sweden and how it's perceived there as public health, really as public health, which is just terrific. Question for each of you. As you look out, it was interesting, Lauren, you teased me with this idea of going out the next 5 to 10 years. Laura and Miia, just individually, what are you most excited about looking out to the future? And Laura, why don't you start? Because you come from an industry perspective into this, so please.
So I think that I've touched on this before, but I am seeing an inflection point in the scientists, in their beliefs, in the research that they are investing in. Mark and I had an opportunity to sit with the head of neuroscience development, research and development at Lilly. And it was with Howard, and he sat down with us. And even before we had an opportunity to congratulate him, because they have a drug that is very close to finishing their late-stage trials, and it is looking very promising. And I can tell you, having been at Lilly 25 years ago, where we were working on drugs for Alzheimer's disease, this is a very, very big deal for a pharmaceutical company. But the first thing that he said to us was, Howard, I just want to congratulate the ADDF on leading the field in a focus on the biology of aging. So I think that what I'm seeing is that the field is finally catching up to where we knew the science needed to go.
Well said, and it's that Wayne Gretzky, he skates to where the puck isn't, and that's what your dollars into the ADDF have been doing over the years, so which is really great. Miia, most excited.
3 things, but very short. First is, of course, the prevention. I think seeing how people are taking it now, it has been accepted, and how people want to be ambitious with the prevention programs. So that's what I'm very excited about, thinking what effect size we can have if all of us somehow take this message further. So the prevention, being ambitious with that on all levels, all hands and fingers are really needed there. That is one area where I'm very excited about. But again, there are others. And the early detection. Here, clearly, the blood-based biomarkers, I think, will change the area. Because if you can start using them on the primary care levels and not only the highly specialized clinics, I think that will change the whole game. So blood-based biomarkers is the second. And then, of course, finally, the treatment, the kind of cocktail what we are having, not only the amyloid-based treatments, but the others. And there are so many new exciting news coming soon. So that is my excitement for the next coming years.
Great answers. Okay, we're going to open it up to the audience. So questions, folks, please. You know what, Wilbur, we'll give you the third. We got 2 quicker hands than you here.
My question has to do with diagnosis. Perhaps I misheard you, but I believe I heard you say that you can diagnose Alzheimer's in 5 days. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what we do at Karolinska University Hospital. So we have created a model where the patients are coming to us on Mondays, and then we have pre-booked all the times. MRI, CSF, we do the lumpal puncture, the neuropsychologist and the doctor is meeting the patient. So everything is happening on Monday and Tuesday. We got the results back on Wednesday. Then we have the diagnostic round, all the different disciplines, and the patient is coming back on Thursday or Friday. It's possible, it's more the operational model which we have created. Feedback from the patients and caregivers have been wonderful. They know when they are there. They don't need to wait many, many months. Many patients are younger, so they also don't need to take, free time from work. So that has been very successful. It's not yet implemented in so many places, but we are very happy to see how good feedback we are receiving. So it's possible.
I have another short one, which is I believe the data is that 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are female.
Correct?
And I'm wondering whether you all are doing any studies on sort of the fact that Alzheimer's seems more likely in women.
Correct. That's a very good question. So it's absolutely more women, especially after the age of 75 and 80. We don't know exactly yet why this is happening, so we need to study it more. In many studies, like in finger, the sample size is a bit limited, so it has been not so easy to study the differences between men and women. Here, of course, in the worldwide fingers, when we have the huge sample size, that is one area I would love to study more, understand more about the sex differences. Are they biological? Are they psychological? What are the social lifestyle? I think they can be many. So this is absolutely a research line we should follow, and I would like to do that.
And in fact, ADDF is helping to fund some of the trials looking at whether postmenopausal therapy with hormones given at different times can be useful in helping to delay the progression to Alzheimer's disease.
So I have a question about metformin. There are a lot of people that are taking it. It's basically a generic drug, as I understand. So therefore, the large pharmaceutical companies really aren't doing any very big clinical studies on this. So how do you really, you need a lot of people to try to look at side effects. Is it really effective? I mean, how can we judge how effective metformin is if we're not having large clinical studies?
And now we are having, this has been exactly the reason and the challenge. It was not easy to get support for that kind of trial because it's widely available. So we got the support from ADDF, and now that trial is ongoing. So there is one trial ongoing only using metformin for patients with MCI, and then in our trial we combine it, not for all. So some patients get only finger and others get the combination. And we are testing the different doses because we did not know if it's metformin 1000 or if it's metformin 2000, what is the ideal dose, what are the side effects. So I'm optimistic that putting together these trials after some years, we can have more answers. In MedFinger, it's 600. So it should be enough sample size to get the okay results.
And Miia, just clarify MCI.
Mild cognitive impairment. And that's the other trial from Jose Luschinger. I think he has around 300 participants, if I remember correctly.
And if I can just add on to that, the field is also looking at how we can understand some of the other drugs that might be useful. So for example, Miia was interested in studying how we might be able to add on semaglutide, so a different type of anti-diabetic treatment. And we were starting to talk about conducting such a trial. And the pharmaceutical company that's responsible for that drug heard about it and came to Miia.
Yes.
Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, that's true. After my plenary talk at CTAD, when I was talking about MedFinger, that company came to me and said, we would love to start a trial. It's GLP, so they were talking about clip finger. They had an idea how we can combine that specific drug and finger. So that's where the discussion started. Now we are talking with ADDF. Could we use this platform design that we could add an additional arm for the MedFinger trial and compare and have that arm as well? So I think that would be quite innovative and also much quicker way of getting reliable evidence.
Mark had given me your book a couple months ago, and I was very impressed with it. But I have one big question. With older people, it's very hard even getting them to take their medication on a regular schedule. You're talking about a massive modification of lifestyles. How can you get them to implement it?
That's a good question. I would say from the finger trial, the persons were between 60 to 77 years old, and they were quite sedentary, quite many of them. They had not been doing so much physical activity. So even small changes can be important. Just avoiding long-term sitting or taking stairs, it does not always need to be on extremely high level. That's what we have been showing. So whatever changes, small changes you can do. And that's why the 5-finger model is so good. If you can't do very much physical activity, but you can change your diet a bit, or you can have more cognitive stimulation. So that is adding these protective layers and having the additive effect. So I would say even small changes, if they are more long-term, can give a huge effect. But the implementation and stimulation, that's why I come back for this finger app. Could we have something to give extra support for wider populations as well? So I believe we need both the human interaction, but maybe also something else. That's a big question.
Thank you.
Yes, another anti-diabetic drug that is gaining popularity is Wegovy, and also being used for weight loss. Do you know of any relationship between metformin and Wegovy?
I'm not familiar.
No. I don't actually know either, but there are many interesting diabetes medications, and I think many of those could be added and tested. So I know some of them have very big effect on weight loss as well. So mechanisms may be several. So for me, again, it would be interesting to see what is the best and for which target population. If it's a lot of weight loss, maybe that is earlier in life. So that could be something for the prevention indeed. I talked with one of the companies with the diabetes medication, the semaglutide, and they are conducting a big trial for weight loss. And I asked the question, could we add a cognitive outcome for that trial that we can see as well if it affects cognition? So it seems that they may have some results coming there as well.
This is a different. Is it working? There's a different kind of question. The research being done takes on much more of an international trend. You travel all these countries. There are great researchers and science all over the world. What about Russia? Is there any contact much with what's going on? By the way, God bless you. Welcome to NATO.
Yes, thank you. And it was 2 days, so that is a big news. That is a big news. No, you are right. The global scale, there are countries who are not part of the worldwide fingers yet. Russia is one of those. We have some Eastern European countries. Luckily, from African countries, we have now 5 countries who are coming. So we hope that the worldwide fingers can be also easy way for some countries to come in, because lifestyle interventions can be conducted. So that has been, for many countries, the way in to do that. So we are open in that sense.
So Miia Kivipelto, and
Hyvää päivää.
and also I know there's a lot of conversation here tonight, and there's a lot that you read about metformin. Metformin is not tolerated by a lot of people. It creates some very difficult side effects that really keep you from utilizing it. I'm just curious, because you're talking about other drugs that are in the same category. do they have the same efficacy, or does it appear? And is that the research that you're also talking
Yeah,
about?
that's a very good question. And what we are now testing in the MedFinger trial is a slow release or extended release formula of metformin that should give a bit less side effects. We are testing 2 doses, 1,000 and 2,000. It may be that 2,000 gives more side effects. It may be more effective for the brain. So that's why we wanted to test both. And the idea is if you don't tolerate 2,000, you can go back to 1,000. So we use a very innovative trial design that we can titrate the dose.
There is, though, a white paper on people who exercise extensively.
Exactly.
That metformin can create an issue where it actually takes away your energy and causes you to have almost chronic fatigue
Correct.
sort of effects. So I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Exactly, and that was one of our questions as well. We don't even know if the high dose is the best one with physical activity. So again, that's why we are so much thinking that we need to have randomized controlled trials to answer to these questions, because otherwise we don't know if we are doing some benefit or more harm. And the newer type of diabetes medications, they have not yet been studied as much as metformin. So that's why metformin was easy start in many ways. But I think something like semaglutide could be really interesting to see how it works. So that's our next step.
And I would just add that we think that there are the many different opportunities for adding on in the combination therapies. It won't just be a single drug, and we'll have to identify using biomarkers and understand which type of therapy will be right for each individual, which is why we need to continue to study all different aspects of the biology of aging.
That's good.
I'd like to ask a question. I don't know if this is on or not. I have a loud voice. It doesn't matter. First, just as a clarification, you said earlier that 60% plus of Alzheimer's, 2/3, are females. But is that adjusted for age? Because obviously men have a lot shorter life expectancy. All the men know that. So age adjusted, is it also true that Alzheimer's is more prevalent in females?
Yes.
Yeah.
So because that was first, women live longer, so we have more time to develop Alzheimer's disease. That's the case. But that's why the risk increase is especially high after 75 and 80 years. So even though we take into account the age difference, that seems to be the case.
And the other question I would ask, this is kind of boring, but inflammation is kind of a popular thing to talk about, but obviously inflammation is a major issue in terms of all of this morbidity state, right? So I guess the question I have is are there, other than kind of the prosaic, are there any other approaches to reducing inflammation in general?
Yeah, that's a
And I know
great question.
Statins are sometimes
Statin is
recommended
one.
for that.
Yeah, many drugs are having this type of pleiotropic effects that they may reduce inflammation as well. Metformin can do it, statins can do it, many other drugs as well. So that may be part of the effect they are having. Physical activity, healthy diet, many of the lifestyle factors, we believe that inflammation is one of the mediating factors. It has been a bit difficult to measure inflammation. There are many biomarkers, but they are not always specific for the brain. So that's also some area for the research. We should develop some better biomarkers from blood that are reflecting also what is happening in the brain.
Right, because we're looking at not just general systemic inflammation, but the inflammation that happens in the brain. And that can be exacerbated by particular types of cells in the brain that get activated. So there are now therapies in development that are particularly targeting what we call these activated microglia that are the specific types of inflammatory cells in the brain. And so we are developing, with support from ADDF and many others, particular therapies targeted at neuroinflammation and for developing biomarkers for these types of mechanisms. So that's where we see the future as we're thinking about this precision prevention, because, in the future, it might be that we would add that type of drug onto the lifestyle intervention.
If I can. So I know we're talking about prescription drugs, et cetera, but if you're fortunate enough to not be taking prescription drugs and you have to rely on supplements, and you may not want to comment on it, but green tea, for example, I believe is reputed to be very effective for inflammation. So do you believe such a thing as that supplement is effective on the brain and through the brain barrier, et cetera, whatever the case may be, is that in fact effective for the brain?
It has been difficult. I don't think there are any high quality or good quality clinical trials, and that is the case for many single nutrients and supplements. So that has been the tricky part, and that's why in our trials we have been focusing more on the dietary patterns, like healthy Nordic diet or Mediterranean diet. Is other thing if you have deficiency of some vitamins. Green tea, I think in one of the worldwide finger studies is added for the finger type of intervention. So let's see what they find.
And I can also steer you towards a website that ADDF is responsible for, cognitivevitality.org, that has a compilation of an assessment of the scientific evidence for many of these supplements and other types of interventions. So you can type in the particular term that you're interested in searching on, and what you'll find is a scientifically assessed vetting of the evidence for any particular type of supplement. Sure, it is cognitivevitality.org, but if you go to the ADDF website, you will be able to find a link to their site, to our site. And this is actually curated by a team of 3 PhD neuroscientists who go in and essentially conduct a scientific review for any particular topic. So I highly recommend that you take advantage of that.
I think that artificial intelligence is going to play a huge role in solving this riddle of Alzheimer's. Is anybody utilizing artificial intelligence? You know, we've been exposed to this new technology recently of chat box GPT. Mm-hmm. And this is an incredible technology. And, you know, artificial intelligence already has been utilized in the successful development of drugs.
Correct.
So what kind of role are we using?
I can start just saying that we have indeed the concept AI fingers. So we aim to use the worldwide fingers data, and not that me as a scientist can run the traditional statistical analysis, but we are aiming to use, and we are already doing that, AI and more data-driven kind of analysis. And I think that can really open new avenues in the field. And again, the big data we are collecting that gives new opportunities for that. So the concept AI fingers is developing. I'm also thinking in the drug development, because I said it takes 10 years to have the phase 1, 2, and 3. Then there is this preclinical phase. Could we speed up that process as well, utilizing all the data, the real-world data, all the digital data? So here I also think AI will have a big role.
Yes, I can absolutely say whenever you have big data, so this might be generation of biomarker data off of samples collected from patients. We can do whole genome sequencing from these patients, and that is an area where AI will be hugely helpful in being able to identify patterns to associate with the development of symptoms. We know that AI is being used to help identify novel targets for drug discovery and development. And even in our own work, as we've said, we've been funding diagnostic tool diagnostic test development. And we know that AI can be used to try to understand the patterns for some of these digital technologies that are being used. So we absolutely see that AI will be useful, and we are hopeful that it will speed up the process.
Question about COVID. It's the pandemic is around the world. It's an inflammation. It has iterations, and it'll be with us for a long time, I assume. Have you seen any connection or any impact on your subject relative to COVID?
Yes, we have. It's a great question. And actually, we conducted the COVID survey as part of the Worldwide Fingers because the COVID hit middle of our studies. So we wanted to understand how the pandemic has been affecting both the risk factors, but also the cognition. So first, pandemic has had a huge negative impact on many of the lifestyle factors. 40% more loneliness, sleeping problems have increased, subjective cognitive impairment has increased. So there are many factors that have changed. So that's why I think it's so important to focus on prevention now. The second thing, we also see that there seems to be persons with this kind of long COVID, long-term effects after the COVID infection. It's not yet totally clear if it can really increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease, or is it more some kind of cognitive impairment. But there are several studies who have been identifying COVID infection as one of the risk factors for cognitive impairment at least. So again, a study area that is important to study further. It may unfortunately not be the last infection that is coming. So again, even infections, new hypotheses may come.
A question here. You talked about the risk factors for Alzheimer's and the fact that the number of risk factors you keep identifying is growing and growing. In the studies that you did you get any information about quantitatively which risk factors seem to be the most important? We know that it's very difficult to change people's behaviors. So if you had to tell people to change one or to change two, is there any quantitative information about that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it has been quite difficult. We have been analyzing so-called population attributable risk, how big is the impact for various risk factors. And I would say there are not huge differences, like high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, they all seem to increase the risk maybe 2 or 3 times. So around the same amount as APOE4, one of the most important genetic factors. So that is there. But I think it depends how long time you have the risk factor, when you have the exposure. So if we are thinking on the global level, education is one of the key factors, because in low middle income countries, people don't have so much education. Smoking is also one, and hearing loss seems to be one important as well. In our societies, it may be something else, but it depends a little bit in what context you are having. That's also one reason why we developed the finger model, because it is better if you try to target many risk factors at the same time, the multi-domain concept, because many of them are also interrelated. Physical activity, you can change maybe diabetes, the blood pressure, and so on. So they are not always totally isolated. And one more thing, we believe that we need to have both the individual level interventions, but also population-based societal changes, making the healthy choices the easy ones. So it's not always individual choices to make the healthy choices. So we need to have both individual choices, but also affect the health policy.
And did you get any information in your study about what the relative risk was for people who had immediate relatives that had Alzheimer's, a parent or a sibling?
Yeah, normally there have been different estimates, but it's the same, around 2 to 3 times higher risk if you have someone in your close family. If you have APOE4, the most important genetic factor, is around 2 to 3 times higher risk. If you have 2 APOE4 alleles, then you have up to 5 to 10 times higher risk. So that is increasing the risk even more. But again, it's not only genes, so that's what I think is nice thing. APO is there, but blood pressure and others seem to increase the risk also quite a bit.
So we have time for one more question. Ginger, I think you get it.
You had touched on the clinics that that you have in Sweden and how you treat those people in your clinics, is there any kind of plan that we could bring to the United States? Because the facilities here are archaic. People develop Alzheimer's and they're put in these homes, and there's nothing new. There's nothing.
I think this is very important area. Again, not only research, but how can we increase the knowledge, educate, implement, and at least what I'm happy to do is to share the models. And that's why we have this close collaboration now. So what we have been doing, if it can be used to stimulate further these kind of things, I think it would be really, really nice. Would be happy to talk more about that.
We have a round of applause. This is just fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And just give me one more minute. If I could ask you to just give one more minute. And, you know, Heidi, coming to the end of the series this year, there's a couple of real clear takeaways I hope all have. Number one, we can diagnose, you can find out if you're at risk. Number two, you can do something about it. And number three, despite what you may read about in the news, not only are the first breakthroughs coming, but the real excitement in the field is this biology of aging, how we're going to combine therapies and how that's really going to make a dent in this. And I bring that all up because some of you may have seen the news today or we've reached out to you directly, but the Lauder family, as in Leonard and Ronald Lauder and Leonard's sons and Ronald's daughters, have made a $200 million commitment to the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. And they've done this in celebration of our 25th year, but really to look out over the next 15 years, that donation is going to cover all of the expenses of the organization, okay? So that we can say for the next 2 decades to all of you, every penny you give goes directly to the clinical trials that you're hearing about. And these future trials you're hearing about, and can we start adding more drugs or more repurposed drugs? The only thing that stands in our way is capital, and speed matters. And I will tell you this because many of you know, because I think you were probably at his party, but Leonard turned 90 just a month ago. And Leonard, when he looked at this, he said to us, not sure he's going to be here for the end of that, but boy, would he love to see 15 years get shrunk down to 5 to 10 years. Your support enables us to do that. So thank you very much again to our 2 doctors. They're here if you want to ask more personal questions. Read the book. It's really good. So thank you.